Well, we're coming now to point 3, part 3 in our teaching through James chapter 5 on the subject of suffering. We've looked at the problem of suffering. We've just thought about 2 patterns of suffering that these verses give us, how we can deal with it. Now we're going to look at the purpose of suffering. And this really gets at the heart of much of our understanding of suffering from a biblical perspective. What is the purpose of suffering? Why do we suffer? Why is suffering a thing? Depending on your worldview, depending on your underlying sort of philosophy of how you see the world working and wired up, you will approach this question of suffering in very different ways. For some people, especially from maybe let's say an atheistic or secular worldview, they generally will probably conclude that suffering is ultimately pointless, philosophically pointless. It has no goal, no end. It is just a bare fact of human existence. We just have to push through it. There is no point. Perhaps to the Buddhist, suffering is considered to be an illusion. It's not real. For a Muslim, suffering is just often met with the term inshallah, God willing. God wills it. You know, it's just what God has willed, so therefore it is what it is. It's sort of a fatalistic view, perhaps. But what I want to show you here is the Christian worldview, the Christian position towards suffering says that actually suffering itself is bad, it is real, it is bad, but through it there can be, and there is indeed purpose. There is a point to it. Verse 11, James chapter 5 verse 11 says this: "You've heard of the steadfastness of Job," we've just covered that, "and you have seen the purpose of the Lord," wait for it, "how the Lord is compassionate and merciful." The purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. The purpose of suffering, according to James, one of the purposes anyway, is so that the Lord, God himself, may demonstrate his character and show himself to be what he is to you, which is compassionate and merciful. Not just a glimpse of his compassion, but in suffering, James is saying it is possible for you to have a personal experience, a deep personal knowledge that God is indeed compassionate and he's merciful. And you will get, says James, you will get to receive that and experience that and know that and taste it. You will receive it and see how that works for yourself, how that will speak into your suffering. That is one of the purposes of suffering, according to James. I want to give you a bit of New Testament Greek here. Who doesn't love a bit of Greek? Especially this word I'm about to teach you. The word compassion, in the original Greek, which James was written in Greek, the original Greek is polysplanknos. Polysplanknos, what a great word. The word splanknos on its own, without the poly bit, the word splanknos is literally your guts, it's your intestines. So this isn't, however, the way it's used in Greek is not here a reference to anatomy, but it is a byword to that deep-seated emotion, that core emotion, that drive and that passion that someone may have that evokes a physical and mental response, the gut. And we talk, don't we, about gut feeling. We might say to someone, "What's your gut saying?" Gut check. You know, we know even in the English language that refers to something that's sort of deep and almost imperceptible, something profound within us. But it can speak. It can, you know, it evokes us to something or other. And poly, the bit at the beginning of splanknos, poly means many or much. So what we're saying here, the word behind compassion is polysplanknos, much deep affection, much deep drive, much deep response. That is the word that underlines compassion. So what we're saying here is that God's compassion is deep, it is profound, and it is his determination to show affection to the afflicted and the suffering. That is compassion. It is that gut-wrenching, gut-level, emoting, driving force. That is compassion. And James is saying, in suffering, it is possible for you to be the recipient of God's gut-wrenching action towards you, his deeply emitted love and action towards you. And mercy, of course, the second part, mercy. God's will, his desire to pardon, to forgive, to wash and clean and restore. Compassion and mercy can be known, experienced, and given to you in ways that you would not otherwise have known had you not have gone through times of suffering. That is what is yours, says James, in God. And that is part of the purpose of suffering according to the Bible, for the believer in Jesus. In fact, we could say that suffering is one of the deepest and most profound ways that God would want to demonstrate himself to his people. He wants to provide for his people. He wants to pour out himself to his people. More compassion. He wants to give them more mercy. He wants to allow the sufferer to experience more of himself than would otherwise have been possible any other way. Let me say that again. Through suffering, God would have the sufferer experience more of his compassion and mercy than would otherwise have been possible any other way. I wonder if you are suffering now, either in body through physical pain. Maybe you're suffering in your mind through mental ill health, through depression, through anxiety, through suicidal thoughts. Maybe you're suffering in your spirit, spiritual blackness, darkness, angst. Could it be that God in this season right now wants to show you his compassion? He wants to show you his mercy. He wants you to experience that and know that in ways that you could never have done in health. Of course, this looks different for each sufferer. Sometimes God's compassion and mercy upon you might look like complete resolution of your suffering. He might just say, that's it, an end, stop, over. And you'll be delivered to times of freedom. Another way that you might experience this is through a partial resolution, a lowering or an improvement of your circumstances. You might just get a break in your suffering, a window, a glimpse of freedom. You might get a total reversal of of your fortunes, rather like Job himself did. For you, it might be in your time of suffering that this is all about God wanting to give you a deeper knowledge, deeper experience of himself. He wants to assure you of your faith and assure you of his love for you through suffering. Of course, individual experiences and experiences of the compassion and mercy of God may vary from person to person, all down to God's own sovereign choice and his purposes for each of us. And it's going to be different for each sufferer and form of suffering. But the one thing that is clear, that is utterly dependable, and this is what James brings us into focus on. No matter what experience of suffering and how God demonstrates his compassion and mercy to you in the here and now, no matter that, this is the thing that James wants us to focus on. God will demonstrate fully and finally his compassion and his mercy without doubt for all to see when Jesus Christ comes again. That second reign, that second coming, when the Lord returns, God will show without a shadow of doubt his compassion and his mercy on you and your suffering. Because when that happens, then when Jesus appears in glory and victory, then we will receive lavish and unending compassion and mercy as our suffering is ended, as evil is wiped out, as our pain is gone, Our sin is completely destroyed, and we enter the eternal rest in the presence of God himself. You know, Christian churches quite often use the ancient encouragement. Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ shall come again. He is coming. That is the great hope of the Christian faith. Even in the Apostles' Creed, which we use quite regularly at Foundation Church, along with the church of all the ages, both Protestant and Catholic, we all confess together, Jesus, he shall come again to judge the living and the dead. We all believe this. The angels said to the apostles just after Jesus had ascended to heaven, they said, this Jesus who is taken up from you into heaven will come the same way as you saw him go into heaven. He will come back. Does this encourage you? Maybe you are suffering now, and whatever it is, even if your life right now feels like an entire catalogue of suffering upon suffering upon suffering, if you are a believer in Jesus, may I encourage you strongly and remind you it will end. It will be finished. It may come sooner than you think, maybe not. But as surely as Christ came on the first advent of the first Christmas, so surely will he come again and make all things new. And if you're a Christian, then you need to know this. Your suffering is not the final word. Your suffering is not the final word. It will not ultimately define you. The purpose of suffering. Stay tuned for our fourth and final part of this message series, the practice within suffering.